Good day, everyone. I'm Bella, the moderator for this webinar. I welcome everyone for today's webinar, Business Process Mapping, Streamlining, Management of Data or Record for a Clinical Trial for a Variety of Stakeholders and System. I want to introduce our presenter for today, Caroline Troiano. Caroline Troiano has more than 40 years of experience in the pharmaceutical, medical device, tobacco, and other FDA-regulated industries. I would now like to hand over the floor to the speaker. Over to you, Caroline.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline Troiano, and we're going to be talking about business process mapping, a strategic approach to gathering clinical trial master file, TMF data, records, and artifacts in order to meet FDA compliance. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about the clinical trial master file, and then ICH Good Clinical Practices, GCPs, Drug Information Association, DIA, the TMF reference model, the electronic TMF, trial master file, clinical trial essential files, validation, and different approaches to validation, CSV and computer software assurance, GAMP 5nd edition in alignment with CSA, computer software assurance, 21 CFR Part 11, electronic record and signature guidance from FDA, and FDA's draft ERAS guidance for clinical investigations. And then we'll cover business process mapping and re-engineering, FDA regulatory inspection, and we'll have question and answer at the end. So what is the trial master file? It's basically a collection of all the data, records, and artifacts that are related to your clinical trial that you gather to meet FDA compliance. The TMF is built throughout the trial. It's maintained for 5 years after the trial ends. Now, the regulatory requirements for a trial master file in the European Union differ slightly from those in the US FDA, but the US FDA does require your trial to meet International Conference on Harmonization, ICH GCP requirements. The guideline was amended to encourage use of improved and more efficient approaches to trial design, conduct, oversight, recording, reporting, while at the same time making sure the human subject is protected and the trial results are reliable. As a result, the Drug Information Association, the DIA, stepped in and put together a list of TMF content. The TMF reference model version 3.0 has several duplicate artifact names with different contexts and uses. Now, defining the TMF reference model, the EMA and FDA recognize the importance and the legal equivalence of the trial master file, the paper version, and the electronic trial master file. There may be quality problems with TMFs and eTMFs, and there are other eTMF benefits. And one key to success is using an enterprise content management system, an ECM. An effective eTMF system model builds on the following foundational components. Digital signatures eliminate manually signing and scanning. You can have pre-configured document management reports, canned reports, generated from the eTMF and automatically emailed to subscribers that you identify. The Content Management Interoperability Services Specification, the CMIS, is a format that can improve interoperability. If you have any kind of computer system you're using to process, manage, or store the data, you want to make sure you're following validation guidelines. Examples of trial-related systems are, now let's go out to the stakeholders, including third parties. You've got a lot of people that are involved in a clinical trial. So what does FDA require for your system? If you have an eTMF, you have to show it does what it purports to do. Now, it has to be maintained under formal change control. The V model was something that came out in 1983, back when, or sometime after that, when the first guidance was issued by FDA. In an agile methodology, we see things a little differently. This is going to tell you how much testing to do. And the risk assessment. Here, you want to make sure you're looking at the potential risk if the system fails. Identify risk scenarios, probability, severity, detectability, mitigation, and technical and procedural controls are things that can be used to mitigate risk. You have to document and test them. You have to make sure the audit trails are working. Requirements are basically what the system has to do. Functional requirements are those that deal with how the system should do something, the behavior or function, and the non-functional system requirements, and then the solution, and then testing, the IQ and what we used to call OQ and PQ. UAT can be prepared in terms of the UAT protocol, test scenarios, and scripts. Now, a separate test protocol is developed for IQ and UAT. You want robust scenarios where you have high potential risk. And at the end, a traceability matrix. A validated system has to be maintained in a validated state through its life. Now, the document-centric waterfall methodology, the phased approach from the V model, focuses on appropriate testing, then you do the documentation, and critical thinking. That's just basically asking questions. And when we look at GAMP 5, second edition published in July 2022, critical thinking, it aligns with this. Now, new appendices on blockchain and the guidance for Part 11. This went into effect in 1997. And basically, it says that your organization has to define the criteria. Now, quality and compliance have to be built into everyday programs for inspection readiness. You must have features that will help you assure that your data is going to be compliant with Part 11. The audit trails are very important. You have to know who did what, when. You want to identify who's uniquely doing an action. In security, you want to make sure that you encrypt files when you're using transferring files over the internet. Backup and recovery has to be in place. File formats. You want to treat the electronic record as a source document, retain it as. Now, data integrity is very similar to Part 11. Now, with data integrity, the important thing to remember is the Alcoa Plus components and the metadata, the structured information. The backup has to be a true copy. So now, in clinical investigations, they did modify, FDA issued a draft guidance on electronic records and signatures in March of 2023. The guidance applies to electronic systems and information technology services. The ERES requirements apply to electronic records from real-world data sources. For electronic copies used to create, preserve, and archive electronic records, you have to use secure end-to-end transfers. If you have commercial off-the-shelf software, the extent of validation should be based on intended use of the software in the clinical investigation. Now, during inspection at a sponsor site, FDA is going to focus on data collection. During the clinical investigator site inspection, FDA is focusing on. Now, FDA is not going to ever provide a type of preliminary evaluation of a system that you plan to use in a clinical investigation. The documents are usually audited by the sponsor's independent auditor. Now, before the trial begins, you have an investigator's brochure, also regulatory authorities, approval of protocol. During the trial, you may have updates to investigator brochure. You might have monitoring visit reports. After the trial is complete, you have to have that full accountability of investigational products. So now we get to the business process mapping. So the business process map, you clarify the process and the purpose. Other benefits, you keep the process compliant with industry standards and regulations. In an overview, a process map should have a purpose. Assign someone as project manager. You want to develop the detailed as-is process map. The detailed to-be process map is what you'll get. And you have to recognize constraints and limitations. List all activities, tasks, targets, and resources that are required. Make sure you have all stakeholders. Plan for interim checks. For full work stream, identify stakeholders, including third parties. Here are other ones as well. Create a list of electronic data and records that you need. How often do they transmit, transfer, deliver? So create a list of physical materials. So the process flow to specific standard operating procedures. So examples of flowchart notations, an example workflow. Companies regulated have good reason for meeting compliance guidelines. And just to tell you, recent warning letter trends. So security and access, sharing user IDs, passwords, and accounts. You must authenticate every document coming into your clinical trial master file. You have to have validation of your systems. Training and expertise. You have to have a documented risk assessment. So that leaves the presentation.
That concludes all the session for today. Thank you everyone for participating. You may all disconnect now. Thank you so much, Carolyn. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you. You too. Have a great one, everybody, and thanks again.